Hello and welcome. If you've ever tried learning English and felt overwhelmed by endless grammar rules, verb conjugations, and sentence structures, you're not alone. Millions of learners around the world struggle with the same challenge. Memorizing grammar charts may help in exams, but it rarely helps you speak naturally, think fluently, or connect with others in real life. This story is about a young learner named Lucas, who discovered a different approach to mastering English, one that doesn't rely on memorizing grammar rules. Instead, Lucas learned to think, speak, and understand English through practice, immersion, and real-world experience. His journey illustrates how you can develop fluency and confidence while bypassing the traditional, often tedious focus on grammar memorization. In this story, you will follow Lucas through 10 stages of learning. You will see him move from hesitation to confidence, from translating mentally to thinking directly in English, and from limited vocabulary to expressive, natural communication. Along the way, he learns to absorb grammar intuitively, understand sentence patterns naturally, and communicate effectively without ever opening a grammar textbook. You will witness Lucas navigating everyday conversations, expressing his thoughts, making mistakes, and learning from them. You will see him engage with native speakers, participate in social situations, and even tackle professional and creative challenges, all while learning English in a way that feels natural, enjoyable, and meaningful. By the end of this story, you will understand that mastering English doesn't have to be about memorizing endless grammar rules. It's about practice, observation, imitation, and thinking in the language itself. You will learn how Lucas built confidence, developed fluency, and discovered the joy of speaking English naturally. So, get ready to join Lucas on his journey. This story will not only teach you strategies to learn English without memorizing grammar but will also inspire you to approach language learning with curiosity, courage, and creativity. The journey ahead is practical, immersive, and filled with lessons that anyone can apply to their own learning. Now let's dive into Lucas's story, where the real learning begins. After deciding to move away from memorizing grammar, Lucas focused on experiencing English in real life. He realized that the most effective learning didn't come from textbooks but from interaction, observation, and repetition. Each day, he dedicated time to listening to English in natural contexts, conversations, podcasts, TV shows, and even simple things like reading labels, menus, and news articles. At first, much of it felt confusing. Words and sentences flew past him, and he often couldn't grasp every detail. But instead of translating everything, Lucas started focusing on patterns and context, which allowed him to understand meaning more intuitively. Lucas began experimenting with repeating what he heard aloud. When listening to a podcast, he would pause and try to say the sentences exactly as the speaker did. This process, called shadowing, helped him internalize pronunciation, rhythm, and sentence structures. Over time, he noticed that he was starting to naturally reproduce grammatical patterns without consciously thinking about the rules behind them. Sentences like, "I have been working here for 3 years," or, "She doesn't like coffee," no longer required him to recall verb forms or tenses. They became part of his natural speech. Another technique Lucas used was story-based learning. Instead of memorizing isolated sentences, he read short stories, dialogues, and articles that used language in meaningful contexts. By seeing how words and structures functioned in actual conversation, he began to recognize sentence patterns intuitively. He noticed that questions often began with, "Do you?" or "Have you?" and that past actions were often described with "was" or "did," without needing to study a chart. Grammar began to feel like a natural pattern of communication rather than a set of abstract rules. Lucas also practiced writing small, meaningful texts every day. Instead of focusing on perfect grammar, he wrote about his day, thoughts, or experiences. Initially, mistakes were frequent, but his focus was on expressing ideas clearly. Over time, he discovered that his writing improved naturally as he immersed himself in English content and heard the language in context. Mistakes corrected themselves as he noticed patterns in the materials he was reading and listening to. Interaction with other learners and native speakers became a key part of his practice. Lucas joined online forums, language exchange apps, and casual conversation groups. By engaging in real conversations, he learned to respond naturally, understand idiomatic expressions, and adapt to different speaking styles. He realized that grammar wasn't an obstacle. It was something he absorbed through use, not memorization. To reinforce learning, Lucas created a habit of thinking in English throughout the day. Instead of translating thoughts from his native language, he described his surroundings, planned his tasks, and reflected on his experiences directly in English. "I need to buy groceries," he would think, or "I'm going to call my friend in 10 minutes. This approach forced his brain to process English as a living language, integrating grammar and vocabulary naturally into thought. He also began to observe patterns in communication. For instance, he noticed that English speakers often use contractions like "I'm don't" or "there" in casual conversation, and that polite requests often included "could you" or "would you mind?" These patterns became familiar through repeated exposure, allowing him to use correct forms instinctively rather than relying on memorized rules. By the end of this stage, Lucas had taken a significant step. He was speaking and understanding English more comfortably, making fewer conscious efforts to recall rules, and beginning to trust his intuition in using the language. Grammar was no longer a series of charts to memorize. It was woven naturally into his communication, learned through practice, observation, and immersion. He had discovered that learning English without memorizing grammar was not only possible but highly effective when approached in this immersive, practical, and intuitive way. With a foundation in listening, shadowing, and thinking in English, Lucas moved on to active conversation practice. He understood that comprehension and repetition alone weren't enough. Fluency required speaking in real time, responding to unpredictable questions, and communicating ideas clearly without overthinking. Lucas started small. He practiced daily conversations with friends and language partners, talking about ordinary topics like weather, hobbies, and daily routines. At first, he hesitated, worried about making mistakes. He would often pause mid-sentence, searching for the correct word or form. But he reminded himself that fluency comes from speaking first and refining later, not waiting for perfection. To overcome hesitation, Lucas developed a simple strategy: focus on meaning, not form. He asked himself, "What am I trying to say?" rather than, "Is this grammatically perfect?" For example, when describing a recent trip, he would say, "I went to the park and saw many birds," instead of overthinking past tense rules. Surprisingly, native speakers often understood him perfectly, reinforcing the idea that clarity matters more than strict grammar. Lucas also experimented with role-playing exercises. He simulated common scenarios like ordering at a restaurant, asking for directions, or giving a presentation. In these exercises, he practiced complete sentences, but he didn't analyze every grammar rule. Instead, he absorbed patterns naturally, noticing how questions, statements, and polite requests were formed. Over time, these forms became second nature. Another important practice was storytelling. Lucas would recount events from his day or narrate imaginative stories. Storytelling required him to organize ideas logically and use a variety of verb forms, tenses, and connectors. By telling stories aloud repeatedly, he began to internalize grammar patterns in a natural, intuitive way. For example, when talking about a friend's birthday party, he instinctively used past tense. "We played games, ate cake, and sang songs," without consulting a rulebook. To enhance comprehension and adaptability, Lucas joined group conversations and discussion clubs. Here, multiple people spoke at once, topics shifted quickly, and idiomatic expressions were common. At first, he struggled to keep up, but he learned to listen for key ideas, context, and familiar patterns, which allowed him to respond confidently even when he didn't understand every word. These experiences trained him to think in English spontaneously rather than translating from his native language. Lucas also started recording his conversations and speeches. Listening to himself helped him identify repeated mistakes and notice improvements over time. Instead of memorizing rules to correct errors, he compared his sentences to native usage, noticing patterns and intuitively adjusting his speech. For example, he realized that he often said, "I am agree," instead of, "I agree," and after hearing and practicing correct forms repeatedly, the correct version became automatic. He incorporated question and answer drills into his routine. Lucas asked himself questions like, "What did I eat today?" or "How do I feel about this movie?" and answered them aloud in English. These drills encouraged quick thinking and natural sentence formation, reinforcing his ability to communicate ideas fluently without conscious grammar recall. Finally, Lucas learned the value of patience and consistency. He didn't expect instant perfection. Instead, he celebrated small improvements, understanding that fluency grows gradually. Every conversation, every story, and every exercise contributed to a habit of thinking, speaking, and understanding English naturally, without memorizing grammar. By the end of this stage, Lucas had gained confidence in real-life conversations. He could express ideas clearly, respond spontaneously, and navigate social situations with ease. Grammar was no longer a barrier. It was absorbed implicitly through practice and immersion, allowing him to focus on communication rather than rules. Lucas was now speaking English fluently and naturally, demonstrating the power of learning without memorizing grammar. As Lucas became more comfortable speaking and thinking in English, he realized that vocabulary was the next key step in his journey. He understood that knowing words in isolation wasn't enough. He needed to recognize how words fit together in natural contexts, and use them appropriately in conversation and writing. Instead of memorizing word lists, Lucas focused on learning vocabulary through exposure and meaningful use. Lucas began by reading extensively. He chose materials that interested him: news articles, blogs, novels, and short stories. Each reading session exposed him to new words and phrases in context. When he encountered an unfamiliar word, he didn't immediately reach for a dictionary. Instead, he tried to infer the meaning from context, paying attention to surrounding words, sentence structure, and the overall idea of the paragraph. This practice helped him understand not just definitions, but also usage, tone, and nuance. To reinforce learning, Lucas used repetition in context. Whenever he came across a new word, he repeated sentences aloud that contained it, then tried to create his own sentences. For example, when reading the sentence, "The scientist meticulously documented her observations," he noted the word meticulously and practiced, "I meticulously organized my bookshelf yesterday." Through this method, vocabulary became embedded in practical usage, not just memorized in isolation. Lucas also discovered the power of collocation, noticing which words naturally appear together. For example, instead of just learning make or decision, he saw the phrase, "make a decision," repeatedly in texts and conversation. By observing and using these patterns, he began producing sentences that sounded natural, without having to think about grammatical rules or construction. To expand his expressive range, Lucas engaged in creative writing exercises. He wrote short stories, personal reflections, and imaginary dialogues, making sure to experiment with new vocabulary. The goal wasn't perfection but comfort with expressing ideas naturally. Over time, he noticed that grammar and word usage became intuitive. Phrases like, "I have been considering," or "it seems that," started appearing effortlessly in his writing and speech. Immersive listening remained crucial. Lucas watched TV shows, YouTube videos, and podcasts, paying attention not only to words but also to intonation, rhythm, and stress patterns. He repeated sentences aloud, shadowed speakers, and mimicked pronunciation. By doing this consistently, he began internalizing complex sentence structures and natural phrasing. Grammar rules no longer needed to be memorized. They were absorbed through repetition and usage. Interaction with others provided another level of learning. Lucas engaged in conversation exchanges, where he was exposed to colloquial expressions, slang, and informal speech. When a native speaker said, "I'm feeling under the weather," he learned to understand context and idiomatic meaning without translating it literally. He practiced responding naturally, saying, "I hope you feel better soon," integrating both vocabulary and social conventions seamlessly. To further strengthen contextual understanding, Lucas practiced paraphrasing and summarizing. After reading or listening to content, he would retell it in his own words. This exercise helped him actively process language, reinforce sentence structures, and use vocabulary flexibly. For example, after reading a news article about climate change, he might say, "Scientists warn that global temperatures are rising faster than expected," capturing the meaning without relying on memorized grammar rules. Lucas also started keeping a personal phrasebook of sentences rather than isolated words. He noted full expressions like, "Could you please clarify that?" or, "I'd love to hear more about your experience." Practicing these phrases helped him speak naturally and confidently, as he now had ready-to-use templates for various situations. By the end of this stage, Lucas had developed a rich, practical vocabulary and the ability to use words intuitively. He could express ideas clearly, understand context, and adapt language to different situations. Grammar was no longer an obstacle; he had absorbed it implicitly through listening, reading, speaking, and writing in real-world contexts. Lucas's fluency continued to grow, grounded in meaningful practice and immersion, paving the way for more advanced communication and creative expression. With a solid foundation in vocabulary, listening, and conversational fluency, Lucas realized that true mastery of English required thinking in the language, not just using it mechanically. He understood that when thoughts were filtered through translation, responses became slow and stilted. To overcome this, he began practicing creative thinking and problem-solving directly in English, integrating language into his cognitive processes. Lucas started with everyday scenarios. Instead of planning his day in his native language, he began to think in English. "I need to finish my report before noon." Or, "I should call Anna to discuss the project." At first, the mental shift felt awkward, but over time, English thoughts became automatic and natural. This approach allowed him to internalize sentence structures, verb forms, and connectors intuitively, without conscious grammar memorization. To further develop creative thinking, Lucas engaged in brainstorming exercises in English. He would take a topic such as ways to improve the local park, and jot down ideas in English without worrying about perfect grammar. Plant more flowers, add benches near the playground, organize a community cleanup. The focus was on idea generation first, form second. By expressing concepts directly in English, he trained his mind to associate ideas with language naturally. Lucas also practiced problem-solving conversations. He would simulate real-life challenges with language partners. "The printer is broken. What should we do?" Together, they discussed solutions, debated options, and suggested alternatives. Through these exercises, Lucas learned to communicate logically, propose solutions, and reason in English, reinforcing fluency and cognitive agility. Storytelling became another tool for creative thought. Lucas wrote short narratives that required him to imagine characters, situations, and dialogue in English. For example, he would write, "Emma wandered through the abandoned library, noticing strange symbols on the walls. She wondered if someone had left a secret message." Crafting these stories allowed him to experiment with language, sentence flow, and narrative structure, absorbing grammar implicitly through practice. He also engaged in role-playing exercises that combined problem-solving with spontaneous speaking. In one exercise, he simulated negotiating a contract in English. "If we agree on these terms, can we schedule the delivery next week?" Practicing these dialogues helped him think on his feet, respond naturally, and apply language patterns fluidly, reinforcing intuitive grammar use. Lucas focused on asking questions and exploring ideas in English. He developed the habit of questioning everything he encountered. "Why is this happening? How can we improve this? What will happen if?" Formulating questions in English not only expanded his vocabulary but also trained his brain to process and structure sentences instinctively, further embedding grammar into thought. To push creative boundaries, Lucas experimented with metaphors and figurative language. Instead of saying, "He was very angry," he tried, "He was a volcano ready to erupt." Expressing ideas vividly helped him think more flexibly in English and communicate subtle emotions and nuanced concepts, all while bypassing rigid grammar study. He also integrated reflection exercises. Each day, Lucas reviewed his conversations, writings, and exercises, asking, "What phrases worked well? Which sentences felt natural?" This reflective practice allowed him to internalize successful patterns and gradually eliminate unnatural forms, reinforcing fluency without rote memorization. By the end of this stage, Lucas had developed the ability to think, reason, and create directly in English. He was no longer relying on his native language as a bridge. Instead, English became his medium for ideas, creativity, and problem-solving. Grammar and vocabulary were absorbed implicitly through context, usage, and repetition, and fluency had become a natural extension of thought. Lucas was now a confident, independent thinker in English, ready for more complex communication challenges and advanced expression. Having developed fluency in basic conversation and creative thinking, Lucas realized the next challenge was immersing himself in more complex listening and speaking situations. He understood that advanced English required navigating rapid speech, varied accents, and intricate ideas, all without relying on grammar memorization or translation. Lucas began by watching TV shows, interviews, and podcasts aimed at native speakers. At first, the speed and colloquial language were overwhelming. Speakers used slang, contractions, and idiomatic expressions he hadn't encountered before. Instead of pausing to analyze grammar, Lucas focused on identifying keywords, sentence patterns, and overall meaning. Over time, his brain began processing speech intuitively, recognizing context and intent even when individual words were unfamiliar. To reinforce understanding, he practiced active shadowing. He repeated sentences almost simultaneously with the speaker, imitating pronunciation, intonation, and rhythm. For example, when listening to an interview about technology, he would say, "Artificial intelligence is transforming industries at an unprecedented pace." This practice helped him internalize complex sentence structures naturally, without studying grammar rules. Lucas also engaged in discussion groups and language clubs, where multiple people spoke at once, shifting topics rapidly. Initially, he found it challenging to follow fast exchanges. But by focusing on key ideas, context, and repetition, he gradually became comfortable participating in real-time conversations. He learned to respond instinctively, ask clarifying questions, and maintain dialogue flow, all while thinking directly in English. Another important method was summarizing spoken content. After listening to a podcast or conversation, Lucas would retell the main points aloud or in writing. The speaker argues that renewable energy is essential because fossil fuels are depleting, and climate change is accelerating. This exercise forced him to organize thoughts in English, use vocabulary flexibly, and naturally apply grammatical structures, reinforcing fluency through context rather than memorization. Lucas also practiced complex role-play scenarios. He simulated workplace meetings, customer service interactions, and negotiations. For example, when pretending to resolve a client complaint, he would say, "I understand your concern. Let's explore possible solutions and find a plan that works for both of us." These exercises allowed him to practice formal and informal English in realistic situations, internalizing patterns without referring to grammar rules. To challenge himself further, Lucas experimented with spontaneous debate and opinion sharing. He picked a topic such as, "Is remote work more effective than office work?" and spoke for several minutes without preparation. Initially, he hesitated and repeated phrases, but gradually, his brain learned to construct sentences and arguments naturally, relying on intuition rather than conscious grammar recall. Lucas also noticed the importance of active listening cues. Understanding native speakers required attention to stress, tone, and body language. For instance, a speaker might say, "I'm really excited about this project," with emphasis on "really," signaling genuine enthusiasm. By observing these cues, Lucas learned not only words but the subtleties of meaning and expression, further reinforcing natural language acquisition. He continued to record himself speaking on complex topics and compared his recordings to native content. This helped him identify areas for improvement in pronunciation, rhythm, and clarity, allowing him to self-correct intuitively. Rather than studying grammar explicitly, he absorbed correct patterns from repeated exposure. By the end of this stage, Lucas was able to understand complex spoken English, participate in rapid conversations, and express ideas clearly in real time. He could navigate varied accents, idioms, and contexts effortlessly. Grammar was no longer a conscious concern. His fluency emerged naturally from immersive practice, observation, and active engagement. Lucas had become a confident listener and speaker, ready to tackle creative expression and advanced communication in the next stages of his journey. After mastering complex listening and speaking scenarios, Lucas realized that fluency was more than correct sentences. It was about expressing ideas, emotions, and humor naturally. He understood that storytelling and nuanced communication could take English from functional to expressive, helping him connect with others and think creatively in the language. Lucas began with personal storytelling. Each day, he recounted experiences from his life in English, a funny incident at work, a memorable trip, or a challenge he overcame. By narrating events, he practiced organizing thoughts, using past tense naturally, and incorporating descriptive language. For example, instead of saying, "I went to the park," he would elaborate, "I wandered through the park, noticing the golden leaves falling gently from the trees." Through repetition, descriptive phrases and sentence structures became instinctive, and grammar was internalized through context rather than study. He also experimented with humor. Lucas learned that jokes and playful language required attention to word choice, tone, and cultural context. He practiced telling simple jokes, observing how native speakers reacted, and adjusting timing and delivery. For instance, he tried, "Why did the tomato turn red?" "Because it saw the salad dressing." Initially, delivering humor felt unnatural, but repeated practice helped him integrate idiomatic expressions, puns, and timing into his speech naturally. Lucas expanded his storytelling to fictional narratives. He invented short stories with dialogue, suspense, and descriptive details. For example, he wrote, "Samantha tiptoed through the quiet house, heart racing, unsure if she would find what she sought." Writing and reading these stories allowed him to experiment with sentence flow, connectives, and expressive vocabulary, reinforcing grammar implicitly. He also practiced improvisational storytelling in conversation groups. A friend would start a story, and Lucas would continue it spontaneously. These exercises required quick thinking, flexible vocabulary, and intuitive sentence construction, further internalizing grammar without memorization. For instance, if a friend said, "The dragon appeared in the village square," Lucas might respond, "Its wings spread wide, casting a shadow over the frightened villagers," effortlessly applying descriptive structures and tense patterns. To deepen nuance, Lucas focused on expressing emotions and subtle meanings. He practiced saying things like, "I was slightly nervous about the meeting, but excited for the opportunity," or, "She seemed happy, yet there was a hint of uncertainty in her eyes." These exercises trained him to combine adjectives, adverbs, and sentence structures naturally, strengthening fluency in both spoken and written forms. Lucas also explored dialogue practice. He would script conversations between characters or simulate real-life interactions, such as debating a topic or giving advice. Practicing dialogue helped him anticipate responses, adapt tone, and use conversational connectors, all while absorbing grammar patterns unconsciously. For example, he learned to say, "If you're unsure, why don't we try another approach?" without analyzing conditional forms, as exposure and repetition made the structure intuitive. Storytelling also encouraged vocabulary expansion. As Lucas described situations, he searched for words that precisely conveyed mood, action, or emotion. Instead of relying on basic verbs like go or see, he experimented with stroll, wander, observe, or glimpse, gradually building a more expressive lexicon embedded in context. Lucas discovered that fluency with nuance and humor strengthened confidence. He could now tell stories, joke, and explain ideas without hesitation, thinking directly in English. Mistakes became opportunities for learning, and each conversation reinforced natural usage of grammar and vocabulary. By the end of this stage, Lucas had elevated his English from functional fluency to expressive mastery. He could narrate events, convey emotions, and use humor with ease. Grammar and vocabulary were absorbed implicitly through practice, observation, and creative expression, and his ability to communicate had become rich, nuanced, and intuitive. Lucas was now ready to tackle professional communication, complex debates, and sophisticated language challenges in the next stage. With expressive fluency in storytelling, humor, and nuanced conversation, Lucas understood that the next step was applying English in demanding real-world situations. He realized that professional meetings, academic discussions, and challenging social contexts required precision, confidence, and adaptability, all while maintaining the natural, intuitive use of grammar he had developed. Lucas began by joining professional online forums and discussion groups. Topics ranged from technology trends to marketing strategies, requiring him to comprehend technical vocabulary, synthesize information quickly, and respond clearly. He avoided overthinking grammar, focusing instead on clarity, logic, and relevance. Over time, he realized that correct grammar and professional phrasing naturally emerged when he concentrated on expressing ideas accurately and contextually. He also practiced academic-style discussions. Lucas read research articles, summarized findings, and explained them aloud or in writing to peers. For example, after reading a study about renewable energy, he would say, "The research demonstrates that solar power adoption has increased by 20% over the past 5 years, indicating a growing commitment to sustainable energy." In these exercises, grammar was absorbed through repetition and contextual use, not memorization, and complex sentence structures became intuitive. Lucas integrated public speaking exercises. He prepared short presentations on familiar topics and delivered them to friends, language partners, or recording devices. By focusing on structure, clarity, and engagement, he honed the ability to communicate fluently in formal contexts. For instance, he might open a presentation with, "Today, I will explore 3 strategies to improve workplace productivity," and smoothly transition between points without pausing to recall rules. To strengthen adaptability, Lucas engaged in debates and problem-solving exercises with native speakers and advanced learners. Topics varied widely, from environmental policies to social issues, requiring quick thinking, persuasive argumentation, and real-time sentence formation. He learned to use idiomatic expressions, rhetorical questions, and connectors naturally. Given the evidence, wouldn't it be more efficient to implement renewable energy solutions immediately? Grammar and sentence flow were internalized through repeated use, making communication effortless. Lucas also practiced networking and social engagement in challenging contexts. He attended events, participated in group discussions, and navigated social hierarchies. Asking questions, offering opinions, and responding to unexpected topics helped him think and speak instinctively in English. Over time, even unfamiliar scenarios no longer caused hesitation, as he had developed the flexibility to adapt language to context. To consolidate learning, Lucas kept a journal of professional and academic expressions. Instead of memorizing rules, he recorded sentences, phrases, and patterns he encountered in meetings, articles, or podcasts. Reviewing and using these phrases in real situations helped him internalize formal and sophisticated structures without explicit grammar study. He also experimented with simulations of real challenges, such as negotiating contracts, giving project updates, or explaining complex technical concepts. Through repeated practice, Lucas became comfortable with professional vocabulary, precise expression, and naturally correct grammar, even under pressure. Additionally, Lucas integrated reflection and self-evaluation. After each professional or academic interaction, he asked, "What worked well? Which phrases sounded natural? Where could I improve?" This reflective habit reinforced his intuitive grasp of grammar and usage, turning each experience into a learning opportunity rather than a source of stress. By the end of this stage, Lucas had achieved advanced functional fluency. He could engage confidently in professional, academic, and challenging social contexts, express ideas clearly and persuasively, and adapt to new situations instinctively. Grammar and vocabulary were absorbed implicitly through real-world practice, exposure, and active thinking, solidifying a high level of competence and readiness for even more advanced creative and intellectual language use. By this stage, Lucas had become fluent in everyday conversation, expressive storytelling, humor, professional communication, and academic discussion. Yet he realized that true mastery of English meant integrating all these skills to think creatively, solve complex problems, and innovate in the language. His goal was no longer just speaking correctly, it was thinking, creating, and analyzing entirely in English. Lucas began by combining storytelling with problem-solving. He would invent scenarios requiring logical reasoning and imaginative solutions. For example, he imagined a small town facing water shortages and narrated. The mayor gathered the council, proposing innovative rainwater collection systems while encouraging community participation. As he spoke, he naturally employed conditional sentences, modals, and descriptive clauses, absorbing grammar through context and application rather than memorization. He also practiced writing essays, proposals, and creative content directly in English. Instead of worrying about perfect grammar, he focused on clarity, flow, and the impact of his ideas. Drafts were reviewed for natural phrasing and sentence variety, not isolated rules. Over time, complex structures like relative clauses, passive voice, and subordinate sentences became intuitive, as he used them repeatedly in meaningful contexts. Lucas expanded his engagement with debates and collaborative projects. He joined online groups where members discussed innovations, technology, and social change. These discussions required quick thinking, accurate vocabulary, and nuanced argumentation. For example, he might argue, if we implement these renewable energy solutions, we can reduce carbon emissions significantly and create sustainable jobs simultaneously. Grammar flowed naturally because his focus was on communicating ideas clearly and persuasively. To strengthen creative thinking, Lucas practiced improvisational exercises. He would respond to random prompts or unexpected questions in English. How would you design a city powered entirely by green energy? Or, describe an invention that could change daily life in the next 10 years. By thinking and speaking simultaneously, he trained his brain to process complex ideas directly in English, internalizing advanced sentence structures without conscious study. Lucas also immersed himself in literature, podcasts, and lectures from diverse fields, noticing sophisticated language patterns, idiomatic expressions, and rhetorical techniques. He reflected on these materials, discussed them with peers, and attempted to emulate styles of professional and creative speakers, which deepened his understanding of syntax, tone, and nuance. He practiced metacognition in English, thinking about thinking. For instance, he asked himself, how would I explain this complex concept to someone unfamiliar with it? Or, what's the most effective way to persuade using language? Answering in English honed his ability to structure arguments, explain ideas clearly, and convey emotion, all while relying on natural grammar acquisition through context. Lucas also engaged in mentorship and teaching. He helped newer English learners by explaining ideas, guiding practice, and providing feedback. Teaching required him to articulate thoughts precisely and adapt explanations, further reinforcing his own mastery. Grammar and vocabulary were applied intuitively as he focused on clarity, relevance, and meaning rather than rules. By integrating these skills, Lucas reached a level where he could think, create, and innovate entirely in English. Complex ideas flowed naturally into spoken and written language. Mistakes were minor and self-corrected through context and experience. Grammar and vocabulary had been absorbed implicitly through consistent practice, exposure, and thinking in the language. At this stage, Lucas realized that fluency wasn't just about memorizing rules or repeating phrases. It was about using English as a living tool for thought, expression, and connection. He could engage in advanced conversations, storytelling, debate, professional collaboration, and creative expression, all while thinking directly in English. This holistic mastery was the culmination of years of immersive, contextual, and intuitive learning. After years of immersive practice, Lucas looked back at his journey and realized how far he had come. When he first started learning English, he relied on memorizing grammar rules, conjugation charts, and vocabulary lists. While these methods gave him basic knowledge, they failed to develop fluency, confidence, or the ability to think in English. Over time, by shifting his focus to contextual learning, practical usage, and immersive exposure, he had transformed his understanding and command of the language. Lucas reflected on the core principles that had guided his success. First, he learned that meaning comes before form. Focusing on expressing ideas clearly, rather than obsessing over grammar rules, allowed him to internalize sentence structures naturally. Mistakes were part of the process, not obstacles, and over time they corrected themselves through repeated exposure and practice. Second, immersion and exposure were crucial. Listening to podcasts, watching shows, reading stories, and engaging in conversations with native speakers provided continuous input. Lucas realized that the brain absorbs grammar and vocabulary most effectively when it sees them used in authentic, meaningful contexts, rather than in isolated exercises. Third, thinking directly in English accelerated learning. By planning, reflecting, and problem-solving in English, Lucas bypassed the mental translation step, enabling him to respond quickly and naturally. This habit transformed English from a school subject into a living language for thought, creativity, and communication. Fourth, active practice and experimentation were indispensable. Shadowing, storytelling, role-playing, debating, and improvisation allowed Lucas to apply language skills in real time, reinforcing patterns and building confidence. He discovered that fluency emerges from repeated, meaningful use rather than memorization. Fifth, creativity and nuance enhanced mastery. Humor, descriptive storytelling, persuasive writing, and complex problem-solving exercises helped Lucas integrate vocabulary, idiomatic expressions, and sentence structures fluidly. Language became a tool for self-expression, connection, and influence, not just a set of rules. Lucas also appreciated the importance of reflection and self-assessment. Recording conversations, reviewing writings, and analyzing interactions helped him notice patterns, correct errors intuitively, and refine style, deepening his competence without ever consulting a grammar manual. Ultimately, Lucas realized that learning English without memorizing grammar was not only possible but more effective and enjoyable. By prioritizing immersion, context practice, thinking in English, and creative application, he had developed fluency, confidence, and versatility. Grammar, rather than being a set of rigid rules, became an implicit system absorbed naturally through exposure and use. Today, Lucas could participate in professional meetings, academic discussions, storytelling sessions, and casual conversations with ease and confidence. He could think, create, and communicate entirely in English, adapting to new situations and expressing ideas with nuance and precision. He had discovered the secret to language mastery: focus on meaning, practice relentlessly, immerse yourself in context, and let grammar follow naturally. Lucas's journey is a testament to the idea that learning a language is not about memorizing rules. It's about using the language as a tool for life, thought, and connection. For anyone struggling with grammar-heavy approaches, his experience offers a clear path. Stop obsessing over rules, start engaging with the language, and let fluency develop naturally. Through persistence, curiosity, and immersive practice, Lucas had achieved true English mastery, demonstrating that the journey from learner to fluent speaker is fueled by experience, intuition, and active use rather than memorization alone. His story is a guide for learners everywhere. Embrace the language fully, think in it, speak in it, and immerse yourself in it, and fluency will follow.